there, so today we're going to be looking at graphical data presentation for advanced higher geography. We're going to be thinking about just a couple of concepts in this lesson, and then we'll build on that as we go further on. The point of this whole skills unit and what you're doing here is just to be able to build up those skills so that when it comes to writing your advanced higher study, that you can use lots of these different techniques to present your data, to analyse your data, and all sorts of things like that. So keep in mind that this is the goal of why we're doing this. So it may seem a bit long, it may seem a bit complicated in places, but that's because we're building up so that we can make a really good bit of work which contributes to your final grade at the end of it. So for each of these lessons in graphical data presentation, you're going to end up with, in your notes, hopefully, the name of the technique, a description of what that technique is and how it's used. So that's basically summary of what it is and how do we actually go about using it. 2 examples of where it could be used in a geographical study. Now I'll give you a couple of uses yourself. You may think, actually, I'm particularly interested in this area. How could I incorporate that in? Might be a good way to think about it. Advantages and disadvantages of the technique. This is important for your geographical study, but also for your final exam, where they can ask you to justify why you should use a technique, so you should know the advantages and the disadvantages of those. A worked example of how to use it correctly. This should be in your notes, so this should basically be an example of how to use it. It should contain a couple of little notes for how you do it along the way, maybe a little instruction guide, maybe an example of a final product. It'll depend on which data method you're using. But this is important so that when you come back to use this could be as late as March or April next year, you actually have the notes to be able to go systematically through and know exactly what you're meant to be doing, and that you're getting all those little steps in. And then finally we'll have an activity. This is the activity that we'll use to base our discussions in class and to go over in class. And it's just basically a little test of how you've picked up on that worked example, how you've understood the whole thing. And some of them tend to be a lot easier than others, so some of them might be quite simple. So in this first lesson on graphical data presentation, we're going to be looking at 2 things. We're going to be looking at systems diagrams and bipolar analysis. So just very, very briefly to start us off, what is graphical data presentation that we're looking at? Basically any sort of visual form of data that we can then take interpretations from. Now, you know, if you see a huge big table of data, it could be pages long, it could be an Excel spreadsheet that goes on for days. A lot easier to interpret is just to look at a graph. Graphs aren't the only way we can present things, though they're often the first one we think of. But we'll just chat through it just for a couple of minutes. What are these different types of data presentation that we can use? So the first one, which you might not have initially thought of, is actually pictures. In, for example, a field sketch, you can take in so much information. If you were to imagine describing that in words, it would be really, really long. So pictures can be a really effective way, and we use field sketches because they draw your eyes to particular things, more than a photograph. Diagrams, all sort of types of diagrams, some quite simple, some just little sketches of ideas. We're going to look in particular at systems diagrams, which are quite a logical way of putting information, and all sorts of graphs. Some of these you'll have seen before and you'll be familiar with, some of them will be new to you. We've got different kind of line and graphs using different kinds of scales. This is a graph with a logarithmic scale. We've got kite diagrams. We've got distribution. We've got bipolar analysis. We've got a radial, a polar, or rose diagrams, different names for them, and triangular graphs. And we'll get to grips with how to make all of these. We'll do worked examples and we'll do activities to do with each of these. So as we said initially, in this first lesson we're going to look at systems diagrams and we're going to look at bipolar analysis. Now these are two of the more basic ones, just to get us started. So system diagrams. Systems diagram is made up of words or short phrases, which are often put in boxes just to keep everything clear, which are linked by lines and arrows, often used to summarise a complicated concept or portray relationships within a system. So if you imagine a huge block of text, loads and loads of different complex ideas going on, the idea of a systems diagram is basically that it simplifies everything. So you can immediately look at that and you can understand the relationships between things without having to try and read a whole load of text to try and figure it out. There's a clear start and an end point. There may be more than one start, more than one end, but it's quite obvious where things start and where they end and what the flow through is. This drainage basin, as our example, has too many concepts just to be explained easily. If you've got something that's actually quite basic, then don't waste your time doing one of these. But you know that actually if that is really complicated, this might be able to help. It's also not too complicated that there's lines going everywhere, there's hundreds of boxes. It needs to be able to be explained. Different arrow widths can show different amounts. It's not shown in this example, but you could, if you think about the global heat budget and the amount of energy coming to Earth, that's often shown as a systems diagram. The lines aren't necessarily straight, but different sizes of arrows show different amounts. Could be percentages, something like that. And these are always accompanied by a written description. Even though we're saying that imagine that big block of text and it's really confusing, still put that big block of text in, okay? Because people will jump back and forth between the systems diagram and between your text. And hopefully this diagram should just clarify what your text is saying rather than replacing it entirely. Different things that we use these for. In geography, we use it for hydrological things, so that's to do with water. Different carbon and nitrogen cycles, they're often drawn as systems diagrams. Ecosystems, and you'll be able to think of another couple of examples and add them to your notes. So what you should be doing just now is getting out something to take notes with, whether that be on computer or on paper. Writing down lots of this information. This is your notes and your description, your uses. And start to think, what are the advantages and the disadvantages of these? I won't necessarily give you them. You might have to try and figure them out from what we're talking about, but they should become quite obvious. Here's a worked example. We've just gone back and using this drainage basin one again. We've got the systems diagram up here. We've got the worked example. We've got the text that comes with it. What we've done in this text is we've made the keywords in bold, okay, and they should be able to match over onto this so we can actually see, right, evapotranspiration, where's that happening? Okay, that's it going back out of the system. So just drawing our attention to different bits. You should have a little copy down of this worked example in your jotter or your notes so that you can refer back to this. This is what we're talking about when we're talking about worked examples. The activity I'd like you to do for class and to bring in and to actually discuss is this one to do with the hydrological cycle. What I've done is I've given you the text, I've given you the words that we should be getting in there, and I'd like you to come up with a systems diagram that easily shows this transfer. Now you'll probably be quite familiar with this, you'll have used it before, you'll have seen this diagram before, you've probably drawn it out before. Just go with it. What we're going to be looking for is we're going to be looking for that ease of reading. Okay, so we're going to be looking for it really easily to see different parts, what are the relationships between them all, and things like that. You will have probably commonly seen this, as shown in the picture down in this bottom corner, that they're quite often combined. Their sort of systems diagrams are placed on top of a picture. That helps us to see the relationships and just to familiarise ourselves and give it some context. Just as a little note on the end, we can do some of these digitally. It's a little bit more difficult, but for some this can work really effectively. So in Microsoft Office, we're talking Word, we're talking PowerPoint, Excel. There's a function called Smart Art that can make systems diagrams and other sort of visual representations quite easily. It works if something is quite simple. So if you're talking about something that's in a cycle, that's cyclical, then this is a really, really good way of bringing that systems diagram to life a little bit more. And it also makes it much easier for you to manipulate. You basically just type in the words and it does all the formatting. It puts in the arrows and everything for you. In other times, if your thing's quite complex, for example, that one we've just seen to do with the hydrological cycle, that would be really difficult to try and manipulate this tool to actually get it to work. Give it a go, see if it works for what you're trying to do, but you might have to sort of scrap it and say, actually, that's not going to work at all. But it's there if you need it. So our second technique that we're going to talk about is this diagram here. It's called bipolar analysis. This is quite a simple thing to grasp and you'll be quite familiar with it. It's just changing the way that we maybe finish it off which gives us a slightly better way to analyse things. So it's used to compare two different things. What we do is we work at an average value for each category from a questionnaire. So for example, we've looked at maybe 20 different questionnaires to do with two shopping centres, so Centre 1 and Centre 2. What we've then done is we found out that on average, Centre 1 has a shopping environment to do with buildings, so are they ugly or attractive? Centre 1's got an average value of 3, whereas Centre 2's got an average value of 4. We continue that down, we join up the lines, and this basically makes us a little graph so that we can compare those two different things. We've got descriptive categories, so these are things that are descriptive in terms of words. Okay, we've got the extremes on either side. We've got ugly, attractive, difficult, easy, expensive, free. Okay, and we've grouped all the poor quality ones together and all the high quality ones together. Always accompanied by a written description, so to describe the results as well. Although you might not go through every single one, you might draw attention to particular things. And it's easy to see that they differ, and by how much. So it's easy to see that in terms of parking, Centre 1 is a 1 and Centre 2 is a 5. So that's really, really different. Whereas we've got some, so for example, the value of goods that's quite similar, and we can see that Centre 1 generally has a much poorer quality than Centre 2 overall. You might get some crossing in some results. Common geographical uses, if we're doing questionnaires and it's got different sort of polarised answers, great. And also for environmental quality surveys, which you're familiar with, having used them before. Again, just a little look, we're using this as our worked example, so you want to maybe take a note of this, maybe draw a quick example yourself, doesn't have to be in total detail. Or if you're doing this on a computer, then take a screenshot, pop it in as well. The diagram clearly shows that the new shopping centre, so Centre 2 over here, is perceived to be more attractive than the established centre. This is the kind of written analysis that we'd get going with this. The main aspects of difference, so we're then drawing our attention to certain bits, are the provision of parking spaces, cleanliness, safety, pedestrianisation, and variety of shops. Centre 1 contrasts unfavourably, so is worse, for things such as graffiti, litter, poor parking, heavy traffic, and derelict land. However, there is less difference between the quality of shopping in each. So it's meant that we haven't had to go in and talk about every result in terms of text, which when you're doing your study, really important because there's a word limit on it. However, it means that we've still got all that information across and people can really obviously see it. Activity for you guys to do, bring into class so that we can have a little chat about how it's gone. We've done an environmental quality survey in 2 different areas of a town. Area A, which is over here, inner city area with mixed housing and industry. Area B, suburban housing. So immediately you should be thinking, right, I can probably predict which is going to be on which side of the bipolar analysis graph. The results for each area are shown. A score of 1 in a row means that the area is bad. Okay, so we take that as the poor quality side. 5 means that it's better. What I want you to do is to look at the scores for the 2 areas and create your own bipolar diagram. Then we need some text to accompany that, similar to what we had in the last slide, to compare the 2 areas by looking at their respective results and explaining the differences. So, we're at the end of the lesson. What you should have in your notes, just as sort of a check that you've got everything, is for each technique, so for bipolar analysis and for a systems diagram, you should have a section of notes with the name of the technique, obviously, to start. A description of what it is and how it's used, so what is a systems diagram, how do we use a bipolar diagram. A couple of examples of where it could be used in a geographical study. The advantages and the disadvantages, I haven't explicitly told you then, but you should be able to work that out from having done them yourself and also from what we've been talking about. A worked example, and then an activity which you're going to bring into class so that we can chat about that. And what we've done is we've covered system diagrams and bipolar analysis.